Hey guys, today I want to share with you some tips and tricks that you can use to help you in detecting deception. The first and most important thing that you need to do to help you in detecting deception is establish the individual's baseline behavior. In other words, how do they normally act about 90% of the time. And after doing so, you need to look for deviations in this baseline behavior because that's what's going to be indicative of them lying. And before I tell you how to assess their baseline behavior, I want to strongly emphasize how important it is to not only look for one deviation in their baseline behavior, but several, because just one alone is not enough supportive evidence that they're lying. Okay, so the first most important thing to do is ask the individual open-ended questions. An example of an open-ended question that they would have no reason to lie about could be, when was the first time you rode a bike? No one would have any reason to lie about that. So by asking them open-ended questions that they have no reason to lie about, you're going to get a better feeling and a better understanding of how this individual answers questions in a truthful manner, so that if they're not and when they're not, you'll be able to better detect it and know that they're lying. Okay, so that was the first step. So after asking them open-ended questions, you should observe their stance. How's their stance? Do they have a wide stance? Do they use a lot of gestures when they speak outside the parameters of their body? Do they have very open body language, or are they rather closed off? So do they talk with their arms crossed? Do they have their ankles crossed? Do they refrain from using a lot of body gestures? And look for deviations in this. So with someone who typically uses a lot of hand gestures and takes up a lot of space, is suddenly very closed off, crosses their arms, that's something to pay attention to. The next thing you need to look for is, do they usually talk with their chin and head upwards or downwards? That's something to pay attention to. And also, do they normally tilt their head when they're talking or answering a question? If they tilt their head to the right, and that's something that they do very frequently, they're subconsciously trying to appear more attractive. If they tilt their head to the left, and that's something that they do frequently, they're subconsciously trying to appear more intelligent. So if someone doesn't normally tilt their head when they're talking to you, does so after you ask them, "Are you cheating on me?" and they answer the question and they tilt their head to the left, that could be an indication that they're lying, with other supportive evidence. You should also pay attention to their facial touches. So do they normally touch their nose and glasses, or put their hand over their mouth when they're thinking of something? Or do they usually refrain from that and pay attention to deviations in this? So someone who normally doesn't really touch their face too much, or touch their glasses, or touch their neck, starts doing so a lot and frequently, that's something you need to pay attention to. Could be an indication that they're lying. You also want to pay attention to their fidget norms. Are they normally very fidgety and their legs constantly bouncing up and down and their fingers are constantly tapping against the table, or do they generally refrain from that and look for an increase or a decrease in this? You also want to pay attention to their voice. How fast and slow do they speak, as well as the pitch of their voice. And lastly, take note of their verbal fillers. So how much do they say, like, etc. If verbal filters begin to dissipate or appear when you question them, that's a key indication of deception. Okay, so that covers all of the baseline behaviors that you need to take into account. Now I'm going to go over a few more consistent findings I have found in the research I've been doing for the last several months. Oftentimes, people will engage in depersonalization when they're lying. An example of this is when Bill Clinton stated, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." He didn't refer to the woman as Monica Lewinsky. He said that woman. He was depersonalizing her. And people will also fail to use the pronoun I when they're lying. An example of this would be telling someone, I went to the grocery store, I bought some milk, went home, took a shower, went to bed. In the first two sentences, they use the pronoun I, meaning they probably were telling the truth up until the point where they got home and stopped using the pronoun I. That's a big indication of lying. Listen to whether or not people are using qualifying statements. For example, to be honest with you, I swear to God, trust me, believe me, honestly. If the person restates or rephrases your question, it's oftentimes because they're trying to buy themselves more time, because they're probably thinking of something to say, because it's probably not going to be true. So, repeating and rephrasing the question. Pay attention to that. If someone is telling you no, but shaking their head yes, what they really mean is yes. Version is also a sign of deception. An example of this would be during an interrogation, leaning back when they ask you a certain question, almost as if you're trying to dodge the question, you're trying to get away from it, leaning away from it. Certain natural stress responses that may be indicative of lying: touching the face, touching the neck, covering the face, scratching the head, wiping the mouth in the downward stroke, and pacifying behaviors, so rubbing and stroking your arm, rubbing your hands against your thighs. However, a lot of these natural stress responses do not equate to lying. You have to look for several of them happening at once, along with deviations in their baseline behavior. And I think that's all for today. Stay tuned for more tips and tricks on how to detect deception and other body language tips. Bye, guys.